Sekeres and Price for Friday, June 28th, 2024, coming to you from the Nation Network studio, built by Arbor Lee here at the iconic Wall Center, downtown Vancouver. And if you're looking to host an event and you want some outdoor space, the 34th floor here at the Wall Center, a striking venue with sweeping vistas and an outdoor patio. Learn more, contact the Wall Center, sales at wallcenter.com. Matt Sekeres alongside Blake Price. Gradiano Sasso hitting switches, conducting things in the producer's booth. We got a big show coming up, and it's all brought to you by Applewood Auto Group.
Gradiano Sasso.
He's going to a big Italian wedding this weekend, Blake. His better half is Italian.
Okay. All right.
So, you know, like we call you Black Price, he's Gradiano Sasso.
We are all Italian. Applewood Nissan in Langley. Fabulous deals for you, including the Nissan Rogue. The 2024s are in with lease rates at just 2.99%. This is your do-everything vehicle from Nissan. Check it out right now. Take it for a test drive at Applewood Nissan in Langley. It's all good at Applewood.
On the poll question, asking you, who do you want in free agency? Jake Guentzel, Chris Tanev, Nikita Zadorov, or somebody else? And if you're voting somebody else, we'd love if you specify. Reply with whom. Doing this, Rick Dollywall reporting 1-2, Guentzel and Tanev, the Canucks free agent wish list, which may actually better be described as 1 or 2, because it's hard to see getting both those players in and fitting in the salary. There's a world where they can go over the cap and then just sort of deal with it in the offseason. And as we've talked about all week here, the Tucker Poolman salary and how they account for that makes their salary cap space a bit of a moving target, not quite precise there yet. And of course, Arturs Shilov still needs a contract as well, or a replacement tender. Where'd you vote here?
I'm most likely going to say that they go after Guentzel, that they spend the money on the special player. Nobody else that I see on the market right now strikes to me a feeling of they're going to be much better with that player. Chris Tanev, he proved us wrong with the 4-year contract he's just coming out of, but there's no way I repeat that risk. You're even more at risk with this next contract. And I mean, it is astonishing to see so much demand for a defenseman. He's a dozen-point player in the NHL.
But he's been zero offense his entire career.
But this is new lows. Like 1 goal, a dozen points. Yeah. Like, man. And you know he's fragile. Like, I just can't do it. I can't do it in good faith. I can't give him $5.5 million.
So I voted,
whatever he's going to get.
Yeah, I voted somebody else. I like you. I think they're best off avoiding Tanev unless Chris gives them a sweetheart deal to come back home. But of course, his other home is Toronto.
That's
and
right.
They're apparently involved, and then Dallas is trying to re-sign him. There's, of course, word that Guentzel and Carolina are getting closer together, so he may not get there as well. I do think the work that you've seen over the last 48 hours with Joshua, Myers, and Blueger probably means Zadorov is gone. I still hold a flicker of hope there, or at the very least think that, you know, there's possibly a world where Zadorov doesn't hit the home run that he's hoping to and comes back to the Canucks and says, okay, I'll do that last deal that we talked about. Zadorov on a reasonable term and price is still something that would interest me. And because of the profile of player and how different he is than the rest of what's out there on the UFA market. We're going to get into that in a second. But I voted somebody else, and look, put this out on Twitter. It's gotten big response so far. If you're all in on Guentzel, why wouldn't you be considering Sam Reinhart? West Vancouver's Sam Reinhart. Now,
you have to be convinced he's going to July 1st.
Well, first of all, everybody expects him to resign in Florida.
Yeah.
He's apparently building a home there in Florida. If he does make it to Monday, though, I do think you got to break off the call. Now, AFP Analytics has him as $2 million more expensive per season than Jake Guentzel. They have Guentzel coming in at 9.3. They got Reinhart coming in at 11.3. And that's on an 8-year deal with Florida, so it may even be more expensive on an 11 on a 7-year deal. But he scored 27 more goals than Jake Guentzel this season. He is now a cup winner like Jake Guentzel, and he finished 4th in Selke Trophy voting. Plus, he's a hometown kid. You know, what's better than winning the Stanley Cup, Sam? How about winning the Stanley Cup in your hometown and being a part of the first team to deliver that to your beloved hometown? Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think they're getting Reinhart, but I will be interested if he makes it to Monday, whether there was exploration on behalf of the Vancouver Canucks.
Well, speaking of makes it to Monday, if we're opening it up to ideas like that, stay in the state of Florida. The news today is Steven Stamkos is going to July 1st.
Right.
Now, believe that. I worry about those reports on June 28th because that can sometimes be the last application of pressure from one side or the other. We're not signing you, or I'm not signing with you. And we'll see. But his birthday's scary. It's Marchessault-like at 34 years of age. Mm-hmm. But like Marchessault, he's a 40-goal scorer from last season.
Right.
Better than a point-per-game player from last season. And
for me, before you give Guentzel 7 at 9.5, or maybe even up to 10, and listen to Frank Seravalli later on that, if Stamkos or Marchessault are willing to do 3-year deals with you,
I prefer those.
I prefer that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, back in 2016 when Stamkos signed his last contract, Grady, if we want to bring up the cover.
Because Stamkos and Marchessault, AFP has coming in at 6.3, 6.1. So that's $3 million less
that you put on the blue line
Guentzel that you can reinvest in another winger, on another defense, wherever you may choose.
So back in 2016 when Stamkos was a free agent, he was on the cover of the Hockey News, and they put the likely 6 suitors for his contract back then. They had him photoshopped into a Canucks uniform.
Well, here's the other thing. Rick Tocchet was his head coach as a rookie
in Tampa Bay.
Right.
So there's 2 connections there in the back row of that cover that you see there. So,
So look, I think Stamkos is probably far-fetched. There has been no indication on Marchessault. Elliot Friedman is saying Tyler Toffoli.
By the way, just before you lose Stamkos has missed 4 games in the past 3 seasons.
Really? He's been that durable.
Yeah.
Of course, multiple cups there as well. Friedman is connecting them, saying Toffoli still. As we discussed Toffoli earlier in the week, like the player. And in fact, once you get past the Reinhart, Guentzel, Stamkos, Marchessault tier, frankly, Toffoli might be the best profile because he's a finisher for Paterson. Now, I do think Paterson could well be a finisher with a winger who's a little bit more inclined to distribute and play make than Toffoli is. So it's kind of 6.5 dozen of the other there. But Toffoli might be the best finisher. But as we talked about with Toffoli, we're already talking about a player who's not very fast. They want to get faster.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a 32-year-old, whereas some of the alternatives are 29, 30. And if he's going to cost, if you're taking Toffoli to 36, 37, I think I'm feeling a lot worse about those final years of his deal than I would be on players like Teravainen, DeBrusk, some of the younger Bertuzzi, some of the younger, more comparable wingers. You may not be getting the same level of Toffoli finishing in the early stages of that contract,
but you get other things.
Speed
and grit.
And you also get the peace of mind and the knowledge that the full term might bring you utility, as opposed to copping to, okay, this is not going to be a contract that ages well. Like, frankly, I'm not big on contracts that the moment you sign them are going to involve some years of pain down the road. And I understand that's what it takes often to get difference makers. And what I've been consistent on is Elias Pettersson at 11.6 should be the difference maker. The winger should be the complementary part. Elias should make that guy better, not vice versa.
But you can, guys with low hockey IQ, you can't make them think better. You do need guys that play at their level. It's why when you send star prospects or rehabilitating players down to the AHL, they often don't light it up. Nobody there can play at their level, can't think at their level. So there is a point where that's true, or what you're saying is true, and there's also a point where you're already maxing out how that player processes. You can only do so much there. So I think you do need a reasonable ball of clay for Elias Pettersson to work with at the very least.
Let's get to our top story. Run it back. The Vancouver Canucks had their best season in years, and this management group has, for the most part, decided to run it back. And frankly, even if they get a Guentzel, even if they get a Toffoli, this is very much going to be more of run it back than overhaul the team, because Philip Hronek re-signed. Teddy Blueger re-signed. Dakota Joshua re-signed. And yesterday, Tyler Myers re-signed. So for all the accolades that Patrik Allvin got, the general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, when he sat down for his year-end press availability and basically set a new standard and said, look, this isn't good enough. We're about winning the cup, not getting 7 wins into game 7 of round 2. And they've got Monday, so we'll see what happens Monday. Well, heck, they have the whole weekend. Who knows? They can make trades and what have you. But for the most part, right now, this management group has stayed in its lane and has been more interested in bringing back existing players than overhauling, going out on the free agent or trade markets and replacing those players. Is that wise, Blake Price?
Well, they've, outside of Hronek, who's an RFA and necessitated the bigger contract, without a Zadorov contract, they haven't thrown big money at any of the guys that are running it back. They are throwing the media money.
Well, Hronek was big money, but
as I said, RFA player, and he's different circumstance. For the UFAs, it's been the middling to low end money. Like in the new salary cap era, particularly in 2 or 3 years from now, a $3 million player that's going to be the low price range. So these are the around the edges work. The Dakota Joshua one and the Tyler Myers one are the most risk for different reasons. We'll see what kind of player Joshua looks like over the course of a wider sample size now that he's been given more opportunity. He needs to try to replicate the season that he just had. Now, even 2 seasons ago, 11 goals to the Canucks. If that's the low end, you don't love that, but it prevents the bottom dropping out of the player potentially. But you would like this player to find the consistency level and the drive to be even better. Now, his pace last year, he got 18 goals last year. His pace is over 20. So can he be a 20-goal scorer? We're going to find out. The Myers is the issue, most certainly. So if you're going to run it back, giving it to the role players is one thing. But you do need to make sure that when you dole out the big money, you're getting return. And that's why the Nikita Zadorov contract is so concerning if they were to sign Nikita Zadorov, because it's going to come at middle-high money. And I don't think ultimately, as much fun as we had with Nikita Zadorov, I don't think he's going to give you a return on investment that is in line with the money he's going to get.
That may be so, but I think he could get real close. And I've been a little more bullish on Zadorov coming back than you have, and really have changed my position on that, because when all this first started, I was of the mind paying a third left side defenseman is luxury.
I think we've actually both gone in opposite directions, because when he was ripping it up in the playoffs, I was like, give him the money. Don't care.
We've crisscrossed.
Sober second thought has changed our opinions here.
Well, I'm not sure it's been so.
No, you're getting drunk on Zadorov, and I'm so up.
I sit there at the bar, I have a third beer, and I think, damn it, they got to get Nikita Zadorov back. No, here's why I'm a little more bullish on Zadorov. He's a unicorn.
He's rare, yeah.
So I believe, as we saw in the playoffs, he's the second pair defenseman, that he's better than Carson Soucy. Where else do you get that size, that mobility, those puck skills, and that ferocity. Like, he scares people.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I look at this UFA defense market. Shea, Montour, Roy, Pesci, Walker, Tanev, all good players. Don't get me wrong. None of them have Nikita Zadorov's profile, which is where I want to go next, because
we can't leave Zadorov just now, because as we speak, Patrik Allvin, the general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, is speaking to the media right now. Probably not going to have time to turn around this audio. We can tell you he has said now on this conference call, Nikita Zadorov is going to July 1st.
I think that was already clear, based on spending the money they did on the existing free agents. But like I said off the top, I think Milstein and Zadorov have set a super high target here in terms of what they're hoping to get. I think there's a pretty good chance they're going to get it because teams are flush with cap space, and because of what we just talked about, the profile of the defenseman and how coaches, and especially defense coaches, really, really covet all of that. But I do still hold out hope that we get to the early hours of free agency and maybe there isn't the jackpot that Zadorov thinks is there, and then has to consider, do I want to uproot my family from a city we all really liked in Vancouver to see if the grass is greener in another market that maybe isn't as palatable to the family, maybe isn't as close to a Stanley Cup as a franchise, or isn't a playoff team, or what have you?
Matt, the quote from Allvin, I can't overpay one single player. And Nikita Zadorov was extremely good for us in the playoffs and a character guy, and we did our best. Yeah. And he decided he wanted to go somewhere else, end quote.
But you did overpay Tyler Myers. And I know there's a world out there and a theory, and I've heard it on other shows going, he left money on the table. That's in a world where you are convinced that Tyler Myers would have left elsewhere for a few extra $100,000. And I'm just not convinced of that. I would have called that bluff, because the other thing about Myers is there isn't a profile defenseman like Zadorov on the UFA market. Frankly, I think you can argue there wasn't a winger like Dakota Joshua profile on the UFA market. Certainly not the 3 1/4. There are replacements for Tyler Myers. They may not all be as tall, although Hakanpää is tall.
I think the quibble that Allvin would have with you is that if I did overpay, it's measured in hundreds of thousands on the cap. And I think that they think that Zadorov is asking for
millions more.
Well, certainly 500 and up.
Well, I mean, AFP has them at 5.32. They've been pretty accurate with the re-signings already.
And so
you're not willing to pay 5 at 5.3?
Matt, this is a guy whose career high in points is 22.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
okay,
I think it's testy at that point.
Okay, but let's go through it. I'll do this at the end of, and again, okay, we're going to take the general manager for his word there. What happened with Mikheyev? Oh, we think he's going to be bounced back. We're not buying him out. No, you moved heaven and earth trying to trade him. You wound up getting a good deal, but you gave him away. In fact, you paid to take him off your hands. Allvin also said at the year-end press availability, the next Dakota Joshua, right?
Yeah.
And then they sat down and went, who else on the free agent market has that sort of size, skates like that, scores some goals, is that good in front of the net, and is a primary penalty killer? Guess what? There wasn't a next Dakota Joshua on the UFA market. And so you re-signed him. And God bless Dakota Joshua, because he agreed to a market deal. And frankly, a market deal in this climate where the cap has gone up is a team-friendly
Except
deal.
You're taking that saying as a literal translation rather than a conceptual translation of, hey, we're going to try to find the next Dakota Joshua, a guy that is making $800K, underutilized by one team that we're going to use more.
You're always looking for that guy. Come on.
But they had an example to show of how they did it well the previous year.
Right,
So
right.
I think they're saying,
and if you can find more of those players, great. But at the end of the day, you circled back to the opinion that the profile of Joshua was not exactly abundant on the UFA market, and so you better take care of the Dakota Joshua you know. Frankly, Blake, you can say the same thing about Philip Roenick. And I know it's a good class of UFA right shot defensemen, and some are reasonably similar to Roenick, but you don't know they work with Hughes or as well as Roenick did in the first half.
No.
So he was a bit of a specific profile too. Frankly, Teddy Blueger as well. We talked about this. There were no great comparables on the UFA market. Wenberg does a lot of the things that Blueger does. Monahan does a lot of the Blueger does, but they were coming in at several $1 million more per year. In terms of what you were looking to spend on that center 3, 4C, wherever you're going to slot Blueger in, there's not a ton out there.
I would bet, though, dollars to donuts, the Vancouver Canucks still sign a $1 million fourth line forward.
Well, of course they do.
So they're going to hope
I
that
think
that
you
guy
should go out and sign a number of guys who have fully variable salaries. Of course you should.
But they're going to hope that one of them turns out to be
right. No,
Dakota Joshua.
Flood it with several candidates. Let somebody rise to the top.
As far as defense is concerned, the rumors continue to abound about John Marino at this hour, and the Canucks' interest in him. The question is, how would you even start to fashion a deal that doesn't seriously deplete the Canucks? You could dangle a Höglander or something to that effect, but then you're looking for another winger again, and you're just continuing to delete from the wingers.
If it's Marino, I think that has to be something like She Loves and a pick. And I then think you're out on the journeyman goaltender market or veteran backup market, which you may already be out into. I mean, everybody now, Seravalli, as you'll hear later, told us that today, or if Gafar had that. But presuming Lekramaki and Wheelander are untouchable, I think if you're on the Marino market, then really in terms of your prospect capital or your player capital, I think it's She Loves and not a whole lot else. And I think it's probably She Loves and a first or second round pick here over the next couple of years. I mean, you still have.
It's interesting you bring all this up. Jake Allen is in New Jersey now. He's got a year left. He would probably have to come back in that deal because they've also got Kaapo Kähkönen behind. Yep. Well, he's a UFA.
They got Dawes too. I don't know if She Loves is a target for them.
Yeah.
No.
They just got Markstrom.
Yeah. No, exactly. So I'm having trouble seeing that fit.
Although the cost to acquire him was like Ty Smith in a second, and Ty Smith has fizzled out.
Yeah,
I know he still had some hype then.
Yeah, Ty Smith is a one-time first-round draft pick, so I think they probably felt they could rehabilitate him and do better with him than what Pittsburgh did.
Jersey.
Yes.
Jersey's got a lot of goals.
Than what Jersey did. Yeah, so it's hard saying thing. I circle back to the point about profile of players and how replaceable they are on the UFA market. And again, Roenick, Joshua, Blueger, there weren't a lot of guys of that profile who were on the UFA market. I think it was easier said than done to replace those guys, given the specifics of what they bring. Blake and Walker's, or in Myers' case, Tanev, defenseman, penalty killer, right? Okay, doesn't have the size. Carrier is younger, also a penalty killer. Hakanpää, who's got the big size. Desharnais, who's got the big size. To me, there were more potential Tyler Myers replacements out there, even when looking at profile, than there were for some of their other free agents, which is why I was surprised they went to the 3 years with the full no move protection in the first 2, still getting this contract to $3 million.
I still think that the defensemen are going to get way more than we think in unrestricted free agency past July 1st. Hey, two years at $3 million sounds better. 3 years at 2.5 sounds better. As we said on our emergency pod last night, like it just missed the mark, but I think it was just missed the mark. I think they're going to be able to, because if it was at 2.7 for 3 years, they're probably giving it a different review. So quibbling about it for $300K, I think they can withstand that.
I mean, I'll go back to what I said on that emergency pod. If if he wanted no move protection, if it was so important to stay in Vancouver, I would have insisted on a 2-year deal. Tyler, we'll do a 2-year deal and give you full no move. You can tell your family you will absolutely be here for 2 more hockey seasons. The moment you went to a 3rd year, I think you either needed to get a break on the salary and or the trade.
Well, did they not do that
protection.
with the $3 million AAV? I think the reason why they went that 3rd year is to drive the price down. No,
Right, but it was still $3 million.
yeah, and I think it's a fine deal. I don't have an exception. Issue
I saw
with
you tweet about that.
Yeah.
All right. So talk to me. This is a player who did not want to leave, only wanted to play in Vancouver. You have been ruthless in the past. You had this guy over a barrel. He's 34 years old and is probably signing his last contract.
Yep.
You think he would have left?
I think that's a negotiation tactic to put pressure on the team.
He's got great agents. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
But Grady, the AFP calculation on him was 2 at $3.17 million.
Mm-hmm.
How did he get a 3rd year?
2 at what?
3.17.
Yeah.
You got him at 3, but you gave him an extra year as opposed to the $340,000 if you had signed the market rate. Assuming the AFP is.
Yeah, and it's not the end all be all.
Well, AFP's been light on some of these guys.
Yeah.
Or has been heavy, I should say.
Yeah.
Some of these contracts have come in under the AFP number.
But that's what I'm saying. Like we are splitting hairs to some degree here. Like it's the lower cap hit, but he got the extra year. I think if it was 2.7, 2.8, Matt, you're probably not as critical. So we're talking about 200 to 300.
Yeah, I mean the other thing I just like about it is Demko's up in 2 years.
Still gone now, not the best comparison in terms of
younger and better.
Yes. 5.9, 4 years.
You got 4.9.
4.9. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think that's that.
No, I think you should have dared Tyler Myers because I don't think he would have. He's made gobs of money in his career. Well, let's hear from the big fella. And here's the other thing I'll say. I have been a bigger defender of Tyler Myers over the years than most. I was delighted to see him have a great season and flourish under Rick Tocchet and Adam Foote because I think he's a better player than what he showed us earlier in his Canucks tenure. Needless to say, it was better that they didn't have to rely on him as much, albeit he did wind up being their 3rd most used defenseman in the regular season. I've seen Tyler Myers and perhaps it's because of his height, but Tyler Myers is the guy that I've most encountered when walking around the streets of Vancouver. I've seen him interact with fans before. I think the world of the person. And so I'm glad he's back and that his family can, continue to be British Columbians, both in season and out of season. Let's hear from the big fella on coming back to Vancouver.
Wanted what our family wanted and, super excited to build off what we had last year. And, it's great for us being close to home. I'm really happy for the family.
Yeah. I mean, he had a couple of answers that are right alongside that. He did not want to leave. Could you have ground him down a couple $100 more grand because of that? Perhaps.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking about relatively small potatoes here. You don't want to miss on millions. And ultimately that 3rd year is probably buyoutable, or as we know, it'll probably be at least half variable in the minors. So
yeah,
it's not going to come back and haunt them, this contract.
Great. Can we hear from Allvin here with what Blake was talking about earlier? He's continuing to talk here, but on
don't have the audio.
Okay, can you get the audio? With the audios come in, I just want to play it when we get it up and ready. Okay. Thank you.
And needless to say, that is the biggest takeaway so far is that they are walking away from Zadorov, which I think has
well, they're not walking away. They're saying you go to July 1st.
Right. They're walking away from negotiations in this moment.
Right.
And
well, and part of this is the Milstein. Oh, I'm so busy. I have all these clients. And incidentally, it is a really impressive list of clients in this draft that Milstein has, because he's got Demidov and Salayev and some of the absolute frontline prospects in this draft.
Well, where he was sitting last night, right?
I saw beside Kucherov. But Milstein puts up the stop sign as a tactic, right? Oh, couldn't possibly deal with this Friday. I have all these clients to the draft to try and make the Canucks sweat. No, Allvin comes back and goes, okay, now it's your turn to sweat. You're going to July 1st.
Okay, we got Allvin here.
Okay, let's hear.
As of today, it appears we couldn't go any farther with Nikita Zadorov, and he will test the free agent market. And for us, it's just not about each individual. It's about for getting a team that is competitive and fitting the puzzles in. So that's the direction that Nikita have decided to go, and we did our best, and we couldn't go any further.
As of today, being the operative sentence there to my ear.
This is a 29-year-old defenseman who has scads of experience, over 10 years now in the National Hockey League. I don't think we have yet to see something that he can't do. He's had a 14-goal season, but it was a standalone. He has no seasons above 7 goals outside of that. He had a great playoffs, but it was 13 games in which he got 8 points. He is a big man that can intimidate and periodically can chip in. Do you want to spend $5.5 million on that player?
Well, here's Allvin talking about how they can't overpay for certain players.
We want players that are committed and wanted to be part of a winning team and a winning culture. And as I said last year, I recognize that we're starting to get the respect back, and there's more players that want to come here. That being said, I can't overpay one single player, and Nikita Zadorov was extremely good for us in the playoff, and a character guy, and we did our best, and he decided that he wanted to go somewhere else.
Well, you did overpay McCabe.
Well, you do learn from your mistakes too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No doubt. And he's right. Every dollar could matter here with about 12 or 13 million left, and needing a top 6 winger, needing a third pair left side defenseman, and having to sort backup goaltender if it's not going to be Sheloves at $1 million. So again, Blake, with regards to Zadorov, size, mobility, puck skills mean. If you don't think you need that combination, like if you're willing to go to a profile that doesn't have some of those elements, like a Brendan Dillon,
well, he has,
fair enough.
Brendan Dillon has a lot of those elements, just not maybe quite all of them.
Puck skills.
Well, he skates okay. Well, I mean, Zadorov's not exactly a lightning bolt. He skates well for a 6'6" man, but he's not a lightning bolt.
And you get Dillon for almost half the cost.
Yeah. Like to me, and I'm not a big Brendan Dillon fan, but the value difference is huge.
So offense is not just points, right? It's transporting pucks.
Mm-hmm. We saw that in the playoffs, but don't get drunk on the playoffs. Like if you could get 82 games of the playoff Nikita Zadorov, hell yes. Mm-hmm. But he's had 10 years in the NHL. Right. He's never looked like that for 82 games.
But the guy, Dillon's 34 a month into the season, Blake.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't go longer than 2 years with him, that's for sure.
So yeah, talk to me about that. You get him at half the price. I don't dispute that you're going to save money on him throughout the totality of the contract. But you're also talking about a 34-year-old. Like the game could drop off at any moment with him.
Mm-hmm.
With Zadorov, you're going to get some quality years there. Again, like if you went down Roenick Boulevard because he's proven, known commodity, rather than go on this right shot UFA market, which is pretty attractive, does the same logical underpinning not apply to Zadorov? I look, the distinction is Zadorov probably takes you out of the Guentzel market, right? And they got all their eggs in the Guentzel basket.
Yeah.
And they've got familiarity with the player, and so they love him. And they're going to try and do everything to make this player work. And we'll see if he gets there. Because if it gets to July 1st, as I've been saying, I just don't think Guentzel's first choice is here. I think you're going to have to overpay. You know the agent is going to put the screws to the Canucks going, wow, Vancouver, never played in Canada, American guys, never played in conference, all the travel, the tax. The conditions are ripe for an overpay on Guentzel.
Well, they can only go so high. Like, I don't think they're paying Guentzel $10 million a year.
Okay, 9.5.
Yeah. But I think that somebody else is willing to pay Guentzel 9.5 as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a dozen teams probably that have considered Jake Guentzel.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Canucks not getting Jake Guentzel.
Well,
here's what I would really bet right now.
Here's what I would really hope, that the second the clock ticks midnight Eastern time on Monday, that Rick Tocchet is on the phone with Jake Guentzel. Because while I don't dispute that Rutherford and Allvin could be persuasive, I think Rick Tocchet is next level persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
And we got another example of that today. Elliot Friedman said on his podcast that a player told him Tocchet very aggressively, Elliot's words, defended Carson Soucy in his hearing with player safety on the
cross-check
to Connor McDavid. And that really won over the players. The quote was, he challenged NHL player safety a couple of times and it got back to the other players. Brilliant. Well done, Rick. Advocacy for your organization and its members. We saw that, the Gillis era, Mike didn't give a shit who he pissed off at NHL head office. And in fact, might very well have explained part of the story with Gillis since his Canucks tenure. But he was going to be an advocate to the nth degree for the people in the organization. And Tocchet's got that. And the Canucks are lucky to have him, because that was one of the great coaching jobs I've ever seen in any sport in 25 years in this business this past year.
And I think that, teams that have the Rod Brindamores and the Rick Tocchets, I don't think it's a secret. Like, I think people far and wide have already known that Rick Tocchet is going to be a player's coach, hard but fair, and that he will go to battle for you. So,
because the thing is oftentimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? If you're going to be an absolute thorn in the NHL head office's side, they are going to throw you bones.
But as we've also seen, it's the how, right? Like, yelling and screaming at the league's getting you nowhere. But as we have seen with Rick Tocchet, his diplomacy is on point. Never raises his voice with the officials, and yet gets the point across. Because you yell, no one hears. You speak, everybody hears.
Well, I was once told the story about Glenn Sather, and Glenn just stepping back and retiring from hockey this week, at an NHL board meeting after a NHL head office person had presented, and Slats wasn't having it. Started challenging the guy as he was going through his presentation, and as somebody who was in the room said to me, at one point it got awkward, but Glenn was a pit bull on the point, and it had to do with player safety and suspension, so on. And basically, he let everybody know at NHL head office that the next time one of my players is up before you guys for one of these things, like, we are not going quietly into the night, that we are going to advocate and we are going to push our position and make your life uncomfortable. So if Tocchet is now engaged in that with the head office, fantastic.
I would bet that Rick Tocchet is pretty involved in the contract negotiations, probably more so than a lot of the Canucks previous coaches have been involved as well. I think.
Well, I think Tocchet is telling Allvin and Rutherford what sort of players he requires. Yeah, which is why I think you have seen indigenous free agents re-signed here. Right?
Yeah, I think Rutherford speaks Tocchet's language as well.
Yep. We're going to get to Quinn Hughes and the Norris Trophy with J-Pow. It's on the emergency pod we did yesterday as well. Needless to say, So happy that we can put this factoid about the Canucks to bed. No Norris Trophy winners ever. They finally have that pure number one.
And the factoid of
we have known that for several years, but now it's been
and the
certified.
doubters part about Quinn Hughes. The world knows about Quinn Hughes. We're putting that to bed
although,
too.
Yeah, although I'm more concerned. I'm less concerned about the outside voices and outside markets who don't know the player. That didn't rankle me like it rankled Canucks fans.
Mm-hmm.
What I did find peculiar is that you could go through more than a half century of NHL hockey and not have a pure number one defenseman. Well, needless to say, you have the number one defenseman in the league now. Dollywall says the Canucks are not going to qualify Aiden McDonough. He's a 10-2C, Blake. You'll be happy to know.
Yes.
So he'll be a free agent. This, of course, the one-time college star at Northeastern University. And I said it then, and I'll say it again. The second a college player tells you he doesn't want to sign with you when you're anxious to sign him, that's when you trade the rights to a college player. Because when he's not under your purview and he's not able to develop as you want to develop hockey players, and he gets to you later, or he doesn't get to you at all because he plays out the 4 years and is willing to shop his services, you no longer have an asset. At one point, this guy was an asset, and asset value bleed is the thing here, like we saw in the Benning era. Played the 6 games for the Canucks at the tail end of not this past season, but the previous, scored the 1 goal, went back to Abbotsford and had an absolute shocker, 19 points in 58 games.
When he was good, he was good. He just zero consistency. 11 goals is not the end of the world, but he was healthy scratched and
only played the 2 playoff.
Yeah.
Look, this was twice a point per game player in college, and a guy who, yes, his skating was not good. And a lot of people early on identified it and said, not sure that's an NHL skater. But this was a guy who had size,
great shot,
6'2", 200, and could shoot the puck, and had 2 very good seasons in college as a 7th round pick. There would have been opportunities to move this player or include him in part of a package, sweetener, what have you. Previously, they didn't, and now they're just going to lose him for nothing. It's sad.
Yeah, it's too bad.
It's not too sad, but
yeah, I mean, the value he had was pretty minimal, but you're right. It's asset management. It's a small miss, but I think they were hopeful that the shot would carry the day and that he would. He's a real smart kid. He's a driven kid. So I think they thought that would win the skill flaws over and that he would overcome them. And he obviously did.
I want to get to a couple of league matters here, starting with UC Saros, who is going to sign a long-term extension here with the Nashville Predators. That's going to spit out an average annual value of $7.74 million. Now, when this story broke yesterday, everybody was looking at the Yaroslav Askarov angle. That is the first-round Russian goaltender that the Nashville Predators drafted a couple years back. Truly one of the great goaltending prospects we have seen here of late, and a guy who has done very well in the American Hockey League. So a lot of people very high on this 22, soon to be 23-year-old Russian, the 11th overall pick in 2020.
Had a disastrous playoffs, though.
Yes, but had a marvelous season. And
in
fact, has had 2 marvelous seasons with the Milwaukee Admirals. To me, the bigger discussion here, from a Canucks perspective, do we have a Thatcher Demko comparable at this time next year? Because it will be 1 year from today, Blake, or 1 year from Monday, where the Vancouver Canucks are able to extend Thatcher Demko going in the final year of his deal, right?
Yep.
And ironic, Demko is going to be the same age as Saros is now.
So it's a clear comparable.
Well, I mean, Saros has a longer track record than Thatcher, although Thatcher will have next year to build on that. Thatcher a Vezina finalist this year, I believe. Saros 3 times has been a Vezina finalist.
Sounds right.
Also, Saros stays healthy and plays more games than just about everybody else. But on the Demko side of the ledger, there will be more money in the system next year because we anticipate another cap jump, 4 million or so. So, casting forward, Demko at
8x8.
I
Matt,
wonder if it's going to be more than that.
for a star goalie, if you can get him at 8.
Remember, Tennessee and no tax jurisdiction, right? So the 7.74 goes a lot further, depending on how many tax lawyers and accountants you want to pay.
I think this is still good news. Like, it's not like you go to 10, obvious, all of a sudden here for.
Yeah, you're well shy of Bobrovsky here.
Yeah.
You really are.
And Bobrovsky's was
Signed
signed
years ago.
So,
Right.
like, this keeps it in single digits, and I think that's a win for the Vancouver Canucks. Like, I don't even think it begins with a 9 for Thatcher Demko.
Really?
So, yeah, I mean, if he's getting 7.75 over 8, Demko's not 9. 8.5 by 8. Yeah, I think you can probably swallow that going forward. So it's good news for
Grady,
the Vancouver Canucks.
Gradiano, you're a goalie guy. What do you think?
I was editing. I completely missed it.
Good job, Grady.
Multiple
Busy
balls
day.
in the air.
I would much prefer you edit and get your duties done than be ready to be called on, even though this one was right up your alley.
Yeah.
We'll have to hear his thoughts on Saros or Demko elsewhere. Hey, this draft sounds like it's going to be fun. We had another pick swap today with Montreal.
Pete Carroll's
and LA.
got a job in the National
Exactly.
Hockey
Like John Schneider trading back here. Montreal Canadiens move up to pick 21, owned by the LA Kings. They give up a second and seventh rounder. The Kings were a little light on picks, and so this replenishes their draft capital a little bit. But there's reports that Carolina wants to move in the top 7, that Columbus is willing to move down or maybe even up, that the Ottawa pick is in play, number 7, that the Jersey pick at number 10 is in play. You've got Rutger McGroarty, the fine one-time first-round forward prospect of the Winnipeg Jets, who doesn't want to play there.
All-name team, too.
Sure, doesn't want to play there and could be in play. Natchez saga continues. It sounds like things fell apart with Buffalo and Carolina. You wonder whether Buffalo going from 11 to 14 is what killed that deal in the draft trade down we saw yesterday with San Jose.
And the Devils do want out from Marino. Whether Marino ends up as a Canuck is one thing, but Marino probably will be on the loose somewhere.
So this is going to be a fun draft, I think.
Yeah.
Not to mention, it's a pretty good looking draft. Like, there are some really good looking players here. Besides Vancouver's Macklin Celebrini. He's the surest thing here tonight is Macklin Celebrini is going to the San Jose Sharks number 1. And if you're not familiar, his father, Rick, longtime sports physiotherapist here in Vancouver, and worked for the Whitecaps, worked for the Canucks, got headhunted by the Golden State Warriors. They've been living down there in Northern California, Livermore, California for some time.
Was a Whitecap.
So, so Macklin is going to be going to his second home, so to speak. And then the draft is Ivan Demidov, the Russian winger that everyone thinks might have the most upside, offensive upside in this draft. Is he going to go second overall to Chicago? Chicago has a lot of work to do still on its blue line. Do they go with one of these defensemen? And there is a crop of 4 or 5 terrific defensemen. And that's not something we've seen a lot of, right?
No.
Like, there have been some drafts recently that have kind of been defended poor. A lot of people thought the Canucks reached for Tom Wielander, right? Because they just needed a right shot defenseman. This Caden Lindstrom kid from Minnesota, my God, he looks like the second coming. All that size, all that speed, strength, apparently a smart hockey
Big shot.
player. Oh, big shot, big everything. Kind of reminds me of Byfield. And then some of the other top 10 prospects here. I gotta say, this is a most interesting draft with everything that you've heard going in about teams. And last year, Blake, there was not a single trade, and that was a total outlier for NHL drafts. You're usually looking at 3 to 4, in some cases 7, 8, 9 trades on the floor of a draft. So, TJ Ginland, Jerome's kid out in Kelowna. Didn't mention him, but should. Your boy Cole Yzerman, the American sniper winger, whose stock has fallen here a little bit, but scored 58 goals in 57 games this past season with the U.S. National Team Development Program. So, and if I'm not mistaken, Yzerman has some, I believe he played at Shattuck's with Macklin.
Yeah.
So, San Jose could walk out of here with Macklin celebrating and Cole Yzerman now that they have the 11th pick. So, anyway, the Finnish centerman looks pretty good too. Catton, the Spokane forward, looks pretty good. Right shot offensive defenseman with the Calgary Hitmen, Carter. So, yeah, it should be a most interesting draft. And, of course, it's going to be interesting on Monday, where we encourage you to watch our friends from the Daily Faceoff and their free agency special starting at 8 a.m. Daily Faceoff live free agency special, 8 a.m. Monday. Frank Seravalli, Tyler Yaremchuk, former NHLers Carter Hutton and Colby Cohen will be with you later in the morning, 11:30, here on Sekeres and Price. Okay, menu time brought to you by Greta.
Don't forget about the NHL Draft Challenge for tonight as well at the dailyfaceoff.com.
Oh, right.
You can play the game, 10 questions, and find out how well you know the draft. And I know a lot of Canucks fans have maybe taken a step back, but it's a good little skim. You can answer these 10 questions and win some prizes.
Well, I mean, if you're a hockey fan, this is a big day. Like this is a day where franchises change.
And hey,
this is a day where general managers are put on the spot and we find out a thing or two about them.
And there's a local boy going number one. So you should,
of course,
you should be watching.
Local boy goes number one every year now, Blake.
It's true. It's what we do.
It's what you do, British Columbia hockey. You produce first overall NHL draft picks. Okay. Menu brought to you by Greta. And hey, maybe you're going to the game on the weekend. Quick walk to the rink stadium, go-to spot, food, drink, and fun. And we say fun because that amazing arcade circumnavigates the space. Make it a game night at Greta, 50 West Cordova, or at gretabar.com. Seravalli's going to join us here. Paterson as well. Apologies, no, to the people we go today. We are going to hear from you. Why don't we get through the weekend here, Canucks fans?
Tuesday or Wednesday. Yeah.
We'll get to the people we go next week after you have the entirety or most of their off-season work to evaluate. So that's all coming up. It's time now for our Bet365 bets of the day. Bet365, a proud sponsor of Sekeres and Price. Mr. Price, why don't you lead us off with what you like here?
Well, I did mention twice last week, I want to say, that I thought Jonathan David was due for a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, he paid off for me. Eventually, the goal scorer that Canada's supposed to have came through with a big goal. So as I look at Canada and Chile, who's next up? Who's going to get me a goal in that one? I don't think
Kyle Larin
that Jonathan David is going to.
Kyle Larin.
But it's going to be a feisty game with Chile. Kyle Larin loves to get his elbows up.
Yeah, yes. He's a physical player.
He's a physical battler.
Yep.
His head has been pretty good.
Yep. He had opportunities against Argentina.
Plus 375 anytime goal scorer for Kyle Larin.
I'm going to say on the Copa as well. And we'll talk more about this later in the program. But USA has to beat Uruguay. And that means they're probably going to have to open up. And the over and under is 2.5 goals. And it's plus 120 to take the over. So I'm going to go over USA Uruguay, 2.5 goals. That's on Sunday. Oh, sorry, that's a Monday. On my Bet365 bet of the day. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code VANBONUS when opening that account. Frank Seravalli coming up next.
In a season like this, you never want to miss a single second of what's happening on the ice, and you want to be around your fellow fans, right? Well, Greta Bar YVR at 50 West Cordova, the perfect spot to do so. Hey, if you've got tickets, a great place to pre and post. They've got drink specials every single day. And if you don't have tickets, Well, stick around and soak up the atmosphere with all your fellow fans. Play all the great video games and air hockey. Great air hockey setup as well at Greta Bar YVR. We'll see you there, 50 West Cordova. The Vancouver Canadians are back at the net. Catch fireworks, giveaways, and Friday nooners all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at CanadiansBaseball.com.
To the people we go this week, we'll get to all of your thoughts once the Canucks have wrapped in free agency next week. So our next guest, Frank Seravalli, Daily Faceoff NHL Insider presentation of Great Clips.
And with more than 4,400 hair salons throughout the United States and Canada, Great Clips is the world's largest hair salon brand, official hair salon of the NHL, locally owned and operated 7 days a week, and they have the check-in app that makes sure that you are streamlined and in and out of there with great efficiency. Great Clips, it's going to be great. The well-coiffed Frank Seravalli joined us.
Looking fantastic, Frank, with the Vegas Strip in the background for the NHL draft. Look, the big fish is Jake Guentzel, and we understand the Carolina Hurricanes are putting on a big final push to re-sign the player. What can you tell us there?
Yeah, I mean, they'd love to try and find a way to keep him. They have the hammer in the sense that they have the 8th year that they can offer that no one else can. Is that enough? They're smart. They understand the dynamics at play. They know that because of that 8th year, they can offer less money on the AAV. And it really is ultimately in the next 72 hours, there's not really going to be a giant difference in money. I don't think someone is stepping up that's going to be paying Jake Guentzel more than $10 million a year on a 7-year deal. And because that's the case, it's really going to have to be about fit. And where does Jake Guentzel want to play? That's what it's going to come down to more than anything else. Because when we're talking about 66 million or 64 million or 68 million, the only difference in that is how big of a boat you can buy. And I don't know that that's what's driving Jake Guentzel in making this decision of where he's going to spend the next 7 to 8 years of his life.
Carolina isn't big on rentals, or Frank. Usually their trade deadline activity is for players that, they have control of for more than just a few months. So you don't see that sort of organizational philosophy pushing them a little further here down towards the end to make sure they retain the player and make good on all the assets they gave up to Pittsburgh to get
No,
him?
they didn't really give up that much.
Fair.
They gave up a 2nd-round pick and their 7th, 8th, and 9th best prospects in the system. What they got from him in a team that had authentic Stanley Cup hopes was north of a point per game and really good contributions in the playoffs. Can't ask for anything more than that. And so they are very disciplined in every single thing that they do. They are not going to stretch beyond what they believe is an appropriate price for Jake Guentzel just to do it, just to make sure you keep him. They cut ties and move along. That's what they do.
You said no, you don't expect anybody to pay more than $10 million, but do you think somebody gets to that number like that? You're totally right about the equivalent of $2 million over 8 years, but it's just so nice to see that double digit, right? Does a free agent like Guentzel get attracted when you see that happen?
I don't think so. It's all about what's the total amount of money that's ending up in your pocket at the end of the day. It's not really about what looks nice on capfriendly.com. And I think when it comes to Guentzel, all the offers are going to be generally very similar to each other. I believe the Canucks are willing to stretch to 7 times 9.5. What it looks like beyond that, I can't tell you in terms of how many other teams are in that range, and is someone willing to stretch?
For plan B for the Canucks, is there any chance that you think Sam Reinhart's available on July 1st? Does he talk to the Vancouver Canucks, do you think, on July 1st?
Did you ask about Reinhart?
Yes.
I don't think he's making it to market.
No. Okay.
Do you know who else would be plan B then if they don't get Guentzel? Because the prevailing wisdom here, Frank, and love your thoughts on this, they've re-signed Blueger, Joshua, Myers, because they know they're not getting Jake Guentzel, or at least they're hedging against not getting Jake Guentzel.
I don't think that's accurate. I think if you do the math, they're going to have to squeeze in some areas. But I think it's possible that they can make all of these puzzle pieces fit together and still afford Jake Guentzel.
Sure. If it's not Guentzel, is it one of those next tier of wingers?
Most likely. I think there's no secret here. They're looking for someone that can play alongside Elias Pettersson. What's the biggest thing that we talked about in the second round series against Edmonton. It was, hey, is this a guy that's struggling on his own, or is this a guy whose performance is related to the fact that he's got line mates where scoring chances go to die? And that part, if you can at least solve for that part of the equation, it makes it easier to solve for the problem that, at least during the playoffs, was Elias Pettersson.
So let's go through the names. Marchessault, what are you hearing there?
Most likely to stay in Vegas.
Really?
All right. DeBrusk.
Potentially heading somewhere to Alberta.
Toffoli.
I have no sense on Toffoli.
Yeah. Teravainen.
Don't know.
Arvidsson.
I think the Oilers are going to take a run at Arvidsson.
Really? Interesting. Okay.
And what about the defenseman? The other option for the Canucks is they just shift gears as much as, and they'll have to get a winger, but they could go more down market on the winger and have maybe the best defense in hockey if they wanted to concentrate on that. Is there any sense that they would take a run at somebody of big money ilk? And that might even include Chris Tanev at this point. What do you think of the defenseman moving, or do you think there's a lot of guys that are going to be staying put there, like Montour and Tanev?
No, I think Montour is probably going to end up being on the move. Look, this is the tough part about what you're asking me right now. Someone might be listening to this on Sunday going, this guy's an idiot. 48 hours from now, I mean, everything changes in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like the ask for Montour is pretty hefty, and I think the Panthers made a conscious decision to go after Forsling instead and make sure that they locked him up long term. Tanev, I think a lot of people view the market as either staying in Dallas or looking to Toronto. I don't think that's a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. I know Dallas is still grinding, and they gained some additional cap flexibility from the Suter buyout that might make it a tad easier to keep Tanev. I don't necessarily see the Canucks pivoting and trying to bulk up the blue line in the way that you're hypothesizing. I think you could make the argument for it, of course. And a big part of what the Canucks accomplished in the playoffs was on the back of their defense core. I just see them searching for that help, and if they can get it inside their top six, and if not, how can you find a way to fill it out with multiple pieces using that cap space?
Do you expect trades to happen here in the next 48 hours?
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure. I'd be shocked if you don't have something in the top 6 picks tonight that ends up being moved.
What about human beings, though? Do you think players will actually be traded?
These guys actually become human beings.
They do, but they aren't in the moments.
Yeah. So yes, I do. I mean, look, Marty Necas, number 2 on my trade targets board today. I think the Canes were really close on something that didn't end up happening. That they're in a spot where they're looking out there to see what's going on. I don't think Marner materializes, today or this weekend. Never say never. But there's still what's going on with the Rangers and Jacob Trouba. What's going on with Rutger McGroarty in Winnipeg, top prospect. Like, there's a lot that's happening sort of, just outside of the free agent part of this.
Hey, last week you dropped would She Loves be susceptible, or the Canucks be susceptible to a She Loves offer sheet? I'm just wondering if you have anything further there, whether you've heard his name in any trade discussions. And, now there's the interesting situation with the Nashville goaltender, Sekeres.
I fully believe Yaroslav Askarov will be in play now. If you're signing Saros to an 8-year extension, what sense does it have at all to have a first-round pick pedigreed goaltender playing in the AHL? He's not going to want to do that. He's not going to want to go back to Milwaukee knowing that there's no path forward for him in Nashville. So he joins my trade targets board today. That's a tough situation. So when it comes to Shilovs and the Canucks goaltending, I'm told they re-engaged on the backup goalie market yesterday. It seems like it might come down to math for them with that position, which is why I mentioned Shilovs as a potential offer sheet candidate. I think a lot of people just assumed once the season ended and how well Shilovs played in the playoffs that it would just be Shilovs and Demko moving forward. And I don't know that that's necessarily set in stone.
Yeah. So if you're at all worried on an offer sheet, do you proactively trade?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think the goaltender market's robust? It certainly hasn't felt like that for a long time. You get good value for what you ultimately get in a I won't say star young goalie, but a promising young goalie.
It's not robust also in the sense that there's not really that many teams left that are looking, right? It's not like someone's going to look at Shilovs and say, oh, this guy's going to come in and be our 1B next season. I don't think people are looking at it from that perspective. And also, you mentioned the trade market and what these guys bring in return. It's usually not upper echelon returns, and it's definitely not going to be that way for a guy who has 20 games NHL experience under his belt. That's not going to happen. So it actually I think it puts the Canucks in a bit of a disadvantage. You've got this guy that you like, this guy that you've spent a lot of time building his game up. You trust him based on the playoff run. And you are also arriving at this juncture where you're pretty much capped out if you get your wish list fulfilled, and you're going to have to make some difficult decisions on him.
23-year-olds don't get the keys to the car thrown at them very often, do they? As like the starter. Like if he's 25, maybe somebody is ready to anoint him the starter, but I don't think anybody's anointing this guy the starter, right?
Not yet.
No.
RFAs, what are you hearing in terms of difficult RFAs to re-sign and whether or not any of them might be in play as soon as tonight?
Yeah, I don't, there's nothing really that stands out for me. I think the biggest pressure point in the RFA class this year was Phil Hronek, and that got taken care of. There's maybe a couple tense things here and there. Jeremy Swayman is one probably for me that I'd pay attention to in Boston. They went to ARB last year. And so that resulted in a 1-year deal. Obviously, Ullmark gone. Swayman's the guy. Get a deal done.
Lastly, what'd you think of the award show?
That was a lot of cringe.
And which is unbelievable because they raised the bar on cringe for year after year, I thought. And yet they found new level.
So I was in the seats. The venue was unbelievable. I thought it was the perfect setup for it. It looked good. It just it's really hard to get these guys to play ball. Like I don't envy anyone that is handed the microphone and is like, make these guys laugh and feel comfortable. Like it's not easy.
Why are they so reticent to open up and be like, a lot of these guys are fun behind closed doors, and the minute they've got the mic and the lights are on, they're not fun. Why do you think they're so reticent?
No tall poppies.
We don't have enough time for that today.
Yeah, no, exactly.
there's
exactly. I just want to know why they go back to Kucherov. He didn't play ball at the All-Star game. What were the chances he was going to play ball at the award show when he pretty much knows he's not going to win?
Well, by the way, I voted for Kucherov.
I know you did.
A bunch of people did for Hart.
You've told us that.
Making fun of someone's country that's not the path to engage him and make him feel better. So I don't know what the game plan was there.
Yeah.
And then you've got to answer the question in a nutshell, I would say it's these guys don't want to be different. They want to try and blend in because that's what the team asks of them. And then you see Austin Matthews with his Hillary Clinton vibes and whatever he was wearing. Yeah, I don't know.
A lot of competition for Quinn Hughes. Does he win another Norris?
At some point in his career, yes. But I'd be shocked if Cale Makar doesn't have a few more before that.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, big weekend ahead. Enjoy Vegas, Frank. Thanks for this.
See you guys.
Northlands Golf Course. Download the free app and book tee times with a touch of your thumb. And while you're on course, open the app for hole-by-hole GPS and track your score. 6 to 90-day reservations. Jump the queue. Lock in your date for $10 per player booking fee. Limited daily availability. Check it all out. golfnorthlands.com. Great Clips is the official hair salon of the National Hockey League. There are 37 salons in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, all Canadian-owned and operated. Download the app and find the nearest to you. When you're up next for a cut, you'll get a ready next text. Great Clips. It's going to be great. The Arnold Palmer designed Whistler Golf Club off to an incredible start here in 2024. Amazing reviews on course condition, service. We're reminding group organizers of 12 or more, it's not too early to book your September, October, buddy, or corporate outings. Prime times are filling up fast. So get on this. You, the group organizer, you play for free. Tell us about your group at whistlergolf.com/groups. Here's our Canucks reporter, Jeff Paterson of Rinkwide Vancouver, after a busy week for the Vancouver Canucks and busier still to come through the long weekend. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, guys. Yeah, working up a sweat, just keeping up with all that the Vancouver Canucks did over the last, 24, 36 hours. And as you said, more to come. That was just the appetizer, I think.
Yeah. Proof that the lack of news doesn't mean there won't be news, right? I mean, all this stuff came without any smoke signals whatsoever.
And that's the way Patrik Allvin likes to operate, but it also tells you that, so often in these negotiations, you need the deadline. You need the trigger point to get both sides back to talking and making something happen that, they can volley back and forth for weeks, but that deadline is looming. And so ultimately, that was, I think, the flashpoint that made a lot of this happen here in the last day or so.
I would disagree, Blake. I think the smoke signal was they were trying to move Mikheyev. And then from there, I think it's a very orderly follow the breadcrumbs. They got rid of the Mikheyev salary.
Clearly the negotiations
to be able to
re-sign
Blueger, to be able to re-sign. Yeah, no,
and there was no reports of any negotiations with any of these players.
Well,
though.
I mean, you're always talking to your own free agents. So anyways, let's not quibble about that. Hey, let's address this because, I mean, this is a seminal moment for the Vancouver Canucks franchise. A thought or two, Jeff, about Quinn Hughes winning the Norris, and everybody seems to love the speech he made as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised. I didn't have a vote, but he would have had mine certainly, and I expected him fully to win. What I wasn't sure about with all the discourse in the hockey channels was how wide a gap was it ultimately going to be, and was it Quinn versus Cale? And as it turned out, no, it wasn't, not by a long shot there, but I'm glad to see that the voters got it right. I mean, this was a landslide for Quinn Hughes, 92 points. He has left that all-Canadian division in the dust now, the 1 year that he, was saddled with the -24. And I think that stuck with him, and it certainly stuck in his craw. I mean, you've heard him reference it an awful lot to prove people wrong. This is a guy that wants to be the best, and at least now we have proof that for this past season, there was no better defenseman in the National Hockey League. Great moment for the family, the hugs with the brothers before the parents, in fact. And then, a speech that touched on a lot of the right notes. And again, I think another indication that this year of being captain of the Vancouver Canucks wasn't a burden for him. He embraced the role, the opportunity, seemed to learn and grow as the season went along. It didn't affect his on-ice performance, and I think it has built up his off-ice performance as well, to the point that he's now just a remarkable young guy, and hopefully there's more Norris trophies in his future, but hopefully he's now entrenched in the conversation for the next bunch of years.
Well, it's quite a class though, defenseman that he's got, and everybody's got one. Miro Heiskanen doesn't, right? He's the only guy of this young.
Rasmus Dahlin isn't there yet either, but
right. So, but he'll be knocking on the door. So there's two other young guys coming, but the Makars and Foxes of the world, and Yossi obviously. So, I mean, you want to say he's going to get another one, Jeff, but man, is there a lot of good competition right now.
Sure, and you look at Cale Makar, who probably will get another one or two or three, but he had a slightly off year by his own standards, and in this competitive class, you just can't afford to do that if you think that, you're truly going to be in the running. So he was a finalist, but a distant finalist as it turned out. This is a golden age of just incredible, transformative, puck-moving defensemen who are sort of revolutionizing the position, not afraid to get up ice because they all skate so well that they can get back into position and defend. So you're right. But I think now, you win one, you separate yourself a little bit. And I think he's now put himself on the radar that if there were still doubters, all doubt should be removed. And yes, Quinn Hughes should start every season in his prime as a legitimate contender to add to his Norris collection.
Well, you guys, first of all, I'm just glad the Canucks can put the never had a Norris Trophy winner discussion to bed, right? That had been raging for 54 years. And this young crop of defensemen you speak of is only going to get deeper tonight after some of these first round picks go. Salayev, Levshunov, Buim, and Parekh look like an outstanding class of first round defensemen here tonight at the NHL draft. Let's move on. Jeff, I saw you tweeting about this. Hey, Hughes and Elias Pettersson forever linked. And Elias not amongst the initial 6 members of the Swedish Four Nations team that was announced today. Erik Karlsson, Gustav Forsling, Phil Forsberg, Mika Zibanejad, William Nylander. Sorry, make that 5, not 6. I saw you tweet. A little bit surprising there, huh?
Just based on the numbers. Numbers alone, Elias Pettersson was 3rd in the National Hockey League among all Swedes in both goals and points this past season, 3rd only to William Nylander and Philip Forsberg. And if you go back the last 2 seasons, so we're looking at a body of work that speaks to recent form, includes Pettersson's 102-point season. He's been the most productive Swede in the National Hockey League. I get what happened down the stretch from the All-Star break and through the playoffs. I understand that. We followed it. I was there every single day. And I have to think that the Swedish Federation saw those same things. I mean, that's the only way that I can read this. Look, you release 6 names, there's always going to be some snubs. He will be on this team. He'll be a big part of this team. There's every reason to believe that he could be the standout and the lead dog for the Swedes. But he didn't make the initial 6. And I think that in and of itself is notable, certainly. And I didn't know beforehand whether it was going to be just 6 players at random or if it was going to be a goalie, 2 defensemen, and 3 forwards. Either way, I still thought that Elias Pettersson would have had one of the spots in the first 6 for the Swedes. Just like I thought there was an outside chance. JT Miller, like, only Austin Matthews had more points among American players than JT Miller last season. Now, did I think realistically that JT Miller would be one of the first 6? No, but I think on recent form, and I think a tournament like this one should be about recent form. You want guys that are absolutely going. So I thought there was an outside chance. I was glad to see Quinn Hughes, so the Canucks are represented there. But the Pettersson one is interesting to me. We know this, like, he's a perfectionist. He doesn't like to be upstaged by other players. He doesn't like to talk about other players in the National Hockey League. He's going into a contract that should be all the motivation in the world to get back on his game. But if this is considered a snub, if this can be a chip on his shoulder, if this can be fuel for him, hey,
yeah, by all means.
maybe there's a benefit to the Vancouver Canucks.
Now,
it was 6, not 5. I forgot Victor Hedman.
Who's the youngest guy in that group? Willie Nylander, 28. So they went with elder statesman. Maybe Gustav Forsling's younger than that. It's pretty clear that they just went with the veteran guys that they know at this level pretty well. Forsling's 28 as well. Yeah. So those 2 guys.
Let's move on to the Canucks and some of these re-signings. Jeff, we'll start with the most recent, but Tyler Myers, I saw your tweet and that you, like everyone else, don't love this contract as much as perhaps some of the other ones.
Look, and I want to be perfectly clear here. I have all the world of respect for Tyler Myers, the person, and I'm here to give Tyler Myers flowers for the season that he just had in the final year of his contract. I just was surprised that this group, this management group, which has shown itself to be ruthless and to use leverage. You had a player that had gone on the record. He only wanted to play for the Vancouver Canucks. And as a guy that is 34 going on 35 in season, I was surprised. I was surprised that he was able to get a 3rd year on the deal. Now, I understand bringing the average annual value down and all of that kind of stuff. But I also know that if you don't re-sign a player, there's no annual average value here. And maybe the opportunity cost is, could those $3 million be spent better in years 2 and years 3? Now, Tyler Myers under Rick Tocchet and Adam Foote, the redemption arc has been incredible. How many people in this market have been counting down the days to July 1st, 2024 for years when the Canucks would be out from under Tyler Myers and his contract, and now he's back for 3 more years, and it seemed to be universally regarded in the market. So a turn of events certainly that I didn't see coming for most of the years of the Myers deal. Now it's at half the rate. I understand that part too. I just thought, like, they signed Ian Cole as a 34-year-old going on 35 to a 1-year deal last summer, and we saw Ian Cole's performance sort of taper as the year went along. So when I said there was risk, I mean, there's risk in every contract, obviously. But I was looking at this. There were 10 defensemen in the National Hockey League over the age of 35 last year. And in that group, Mark-Edward Vlasic, Mark Stahl, Alex Goligoski, Ryan Suter, who played but is going to get bought out by the Dallas Stars because they don't think that there's a whole lot left there. Time catches up to everybody at some point, but this is a player that's wildly popular in the locker room with his teammates, leadership qualities. I think they can get something out of him again next year. But beyond that, I do think that there is a little bit of risk in win now mode for the Vancouver Canucks in years 2 and 3. It's not cost prohibitive. The dollars wasn't really. I just thought with this management group, that the premium on a right shot guy, I thought he would get a second year. I was surprised when I saw it was a 3-year deal.
You can't always buy out down the road. And with the cap going up, if there is an acceleration of the cap here, the variable salary will go up as well. So that third year might be escapable.
Well, that might be a lockout year too. Hate to break it to everyone, but all these contracts are now being structured as though agents and players are guarding against a lockout in that season. Okay, Dakota Joshua, what thinks you, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, that one caught me a little bit off guard just because there really hadn't been much talk around Joshua, and I kind of thought that he was going to test the waters, but I have to imagine that fourth year was what got his attention, that he probably was going to be able to find a team out there that was going to give him 4 years and, who knows what kind of money. But when it was the Canucks, and he had stated he wanted to be here, he has thrived under Rick Tocchet. He really has grown up and become an NHLer as a member of the Vancouver Canucks. So I take him at face value that this is where he wanted to be, but it didn't sound like the Canucks had put enough on the table to convince him to put pen to paper. But once they got the Mikheyev deal done, freed up some money, it sounded like they were able to get a fourth year, and at $3.25 million, might he have been able to realize a little bit more money elsewhere, but there is something about being comfortable in your surroundings, in your fit, knowing your role. And this is a good news signing for the Vancouver Canucks. I think there's upside here. This is a guy that scored 18 goals and missed a quarter of the season. So he would have been 20-goal scorer, maybe taking a run at 25 if he had been able to get on any sort of hot streak down the stretch. But there's so much more to Dakota Joshua. I mean, he's one of the most physical players in the National Hockey. Guys, he finished third in the NHL playoffs in hits and played 2 rounds. That says something. I think he was top 10 overall in the regular season, and obviously the penalty killing. And they got Teddy Blueger back. Now they've got Dakota Joshua. They're starting to keep some of the pieces of the puzzle that I think they would have had to chase in free agency, and that was going to come at a cost. The only caveat, and not even a caveat, but I just, with this player, I think it's now about consistency. He's got security, and from years 28 to 32, I think he can return value for the Vancouver Canucks here, doing all the things that he does. But in the playoffs, he had 8 points. 6 of them came in 2 games. And they were game 1 of both of the Nashville and Edmonton series. Like, he got off these incredible starts and then sort of petered out. And for him now, it's, I think too, the start of the season, so many guys got off to hot starts. He was in the doghouse. He was called out by the coach. He was a healthy scratch in San Jose in November. It's, I think, about the long game now for Dakota Joshua. You're in the NHL. You've got this contract. Now it's about just finding a consistency so that you don't go hot and then cold for longer stretches than you'd like to see.
He seems pretty malleable, though. As you mentioned, that beginning of the season adversity, Rick Tocchet sculpted him a little bit, and he responded to it. So he has proven himself to be a coachable player. There were a couple of concerns before these signings that the Canucks had lost a lot of size, or were they going to get size back? And of course, they all wanted to get faster. With Myers and Dakota Joshua, are we mostly satiated on the size thing? Is it just speed now that is the concern going into the rest of free agency?
Yeah, and obviously the Nikita Zadorov story is going to have one more chapter at the very least here, and that would add that much more size. But yeah, I think that they have certainly covered their bases with the signings of Myers and Joshua, that size isn't the issue, that if somehow neither one of those guys had returned. So let's see where it goes from here for the Vancouver Canucks. But we know how much Rick Tocchet likes and values the size, certainly on the back end. And so the Susie Myers pairing will be a thing for the next couple of seasons. And we saw in the playoffs that they can be an effective matchup tool. The size and the length kept opponents like McDavid to the outside. The downside to that pairing, though, is, man, did they tread water, right? Like, they didn't get torched an awful lot, but they spent long shifts in their own zone, barely touching the puck, keeping teams to the perimeter. But it was a struggle just to get the puck out of the zone and then get off the ice. That's a dangerous way to play. And so, this is where I'm kind of curious. You got Hughes and Hronek as this uber pair. And then I'm curious to see how they go about rounding out the rest of the defense core, because they don't have a ton of puck movers. And so if they don't get Zadorov back, what is a plan B there? And what's the prototype of the player that they're looking for that's going to step in there? Could they use more of a puck mover, one more puck mover? Just think, on the off chance, like, you hope that Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronek are healthy and play all 82 games, but on the off chance that one of those guys misses a stretch, would you like to have somebody else on your roster that could profile a little bit? You're not going to replace those guys, but somebody that you've got the size covered. Now maybe you look for somebody that's a little bit more of a puck mover.
Yeah, left side puck mover would be interesting. So top six winger and third pair left shot defenseman, Jeff, are those the two priorities as you see it here?
Yeah, obviously the scoring winger, and we know that they've made their intentions clear on Guentzel, and we'll see what kind of other offers he gets and how that all plays out. I'm curious about a plan B. Is it Toffoli? Is it Jake DeBrusk? Is it an Anthony Duclair? Is it a combination of the lesser players? And with all due respect, they're not Jake Guentzel. Is there somebody else lurking in the weeds? Teuvo Teravainen. There's some interesting candidates out there, certainly. So we'll see how things play out. And then I do think now they're looking at, a depth defenseman. And I don't think they've closed the door to Zadorov. They've got the weekend here. They've got a little bit of money. And it's just a question of, who's going to blink and how is that ultimately going to play out. But they have to be nimble. They've got to be ready to go. And I think that this management group has shown that they will be ready to go. And that's where the confidence in the fan base comes in compared to the previous regime on July 1st, where people freaked out. And was it Ray that said, best move would just be to take the GM's phone away? I don't think people feel that way about this management group. It's all about win now. They're aggressive. We've seen that. This week is more proof of that. The curious one to me, guys, was this report of doubling back on Casey DeSmith. Like, I just thought that door was closed entirely. And I do wonder if that is a negotiating ploy to get the attention of Artur Silovs to sign a team-friendly deal as a restricted free agent. If you want to be in the National Hockey League, take this deal. Otherwise, we may have no choice but to go and find a little bit of security that sort of would serve as an impediment to your path, the straight line to a full-time job in the National Hockey League. So I was surprised. I just thought from the DeSmith camp as well, like, it didn't end well. Obviously, he lost his job, didn't get a chance to get back in the net. I kind of thought that he would want to explore options elsewhere.
Well, I think that was fuel for a Silovs trade, but I just don't see that. There's just not much of a market for that particular.
You don't think so?
Level of a goalie.
Well, I was going to ask Jeff if given that report about DeSmith or a veteran goalie, and if you're all in, I mean, Silovs the value's pretty high now. Do you owe it to yourself to explore a trade there?
It's possible. I mean, this team doesn't have many trade chips, 25
right.
First rounder and a goaltender, I suppose. I mean, those are, and so if I know Irf Gafar has reported that the Canucks have their eye on an unnamed RFA. And I was like, how are you going to go about making something happen here? They don't have enough draft capital of their own to offer sheet. And we know that offer sheets generally don't pan out anyways. So that leaves you with the trade route. And you have to be realistic. There aren't enough prospects in the pipeline that you can, offer up to other teams that are really going to get their attention, especially if you're trying to land a sizable fish coming in return. And Artur Silovs now with a bit of a body of work, certainly high leverage playoff hockey, showed that he can hold his own. I think he's ready to be a full-time National Hockey Leaguer. So I am kind of intrigued by these reports and ultimately what is his path forward here. And is it as a member of the Vancouver Canucks?
If you're looking for a young goalie, Skarov might have just jumped onto the market as well.
Well,
so fair enough.
Not to mention their, the goalie market has already been interesting and could get more interesting from here. Last question, Jeff. It's our poll question, but who do you want in free agency? Guentzel, Tanev, Zadorov, somebody else? Who do you think would fit best, work best?
I think if you're all in and it is win now, I think you got to step to the plate and take your best swing at Jake Guentzel on Monday and see if you can land that player, a 2-time 40-goal scorer, proven playoff scorer, guy that has familiarity with the coaching staff, with management. I think he'd be a natural fit here. Lindholm's not coming back. There's a spot on that top unit power play that seems to have his name written all over it. Would he be the bumper answer as a left shot guy? Not saying he's Bo Horvat, but they were lacking a left shot guy in the middle of the ice on the power play. Jake Guentzel certainly would seem to fit that role as well. So, again, I see all the smoke around Chris Tanev, and I have nothing but the most respect for Chris Tanev. Always enjoyed my dealings with him, watching him. But I do wonder, you've just brought back a soon-to-be 35-year-old Tyler Myers. How much do you want to commit term and dollars to a 34-year-old Chris Tanev? Brendan Dillon's in that same boat.
Yeah.
So I get that it's the here and now, and then you deal with the back end of those contracts later. And certainly if you have a Stanley Cup to show for it, then it was worth it in the end. But there's a lot of ground to travel for the Vancouver Canucks between this and getting their hands on a Stanley Cup. So I am a little wary of just the veterans that feel like they're either approaching or maybe even past their peak performance days. One maybe, but I don't know that I have an appetite to see the Canucks load up on a bunch of 34-year-old defensemen.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying on Tanev. Dylan, I think, is going to come in at less term, but yeah. Big day Monday, Jeff. We'll talk to you then.
All right, guys, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody, if you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content.